Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. And as always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Mason. We talk about sports topics of local interest. We got a national topic we're going to talk about as well on this podcast. And of course, my favorite portion of the podcast, you go to the X first, hit up the hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. Rick compiles them. I don't look at them. I get to answer them off the cuff. It can be sports related. It does not have to be. And the good news is, unlike Anthony Edwards, we did not lose track of time. We are here on time doing this podcast. If those of you that did not hear, somehow an NBA player showed up late for a game because he said he simply lost track of time.
Hey,
and then he didn't. The best part was, I thought there'd be some kind of like punishment of some kind, like we'll sit you for a half. They put him in like 30 seconds into the game.
So I'm trying to think. You're probably oversleeping in your hotel, or you were doing.
He literally said he just lost track of time.
Okay, but again, I mean, whatever. You're puttering around in your hotel, let's say, and all of a sudden you look up and you see, wait, I'm late. I missed the team bus over to the gym or whatever. What do you think that's like? Like, because this morning I sent you a text before we did this podcast, said like, "Hey, morning's not going as I planned. Can we start at 11:30 instead?"
Sure,
no problem. What's the courtesy text you send as an NBA player who missed the bus and is going to be late for your game now? Like, do you text the head coach? Do you text a manager? How does that work?
I think that's when you try to sneak in and say, "I've been in here the whole time. I've been working on my resistance bands. I didn't come out to shoot. I wasn't feeling it. I just want to kind of stay in the locker room."
Hey, it happens, man. Sometimes you lose track of time. I've been on the road in those hotels, and you're sitting there all day saying, "What time are we going to leave? 4:30. Okay, great. I'll be ready at 4:30." And then you get sidetracked doing a few things. All of a sudden, you look up and it's like, "Wait, it's 4:20. How did time go so fast?" So I get it, Anthony. I get it.
My favorite. I don't even know how. My favorite athlete travel story of all time came from Bob Costas when he used to be an announcer in the ABA for an ABA team, the Spirits of St. Louis. And they had a player, Marvin Bad News Barnes, who was a great college player and was really a good NBA player, but just had major issues. Well, they played a game in Louisville against the Kentucky Colonels, and they were getting to get on a plane to fly back to St. Louis. And Marvin looked at his ticket, and it says, departure 7:59, arrival 7:57. He said, "Man, I ain't getting on no time machine." He didn't understand the hour Central Time Zone backup.
I tried to tell Mo Egger that this year when I was out in California, and I was talking to him at like 3:15 here or 3:45 here, and it was 12:45 there. It's like, I don't understand this time zone thing when I'm part of it. It's hard for me to figure out.
I think one year we did the podcast, you were either in Green Bay or Milwaukee, and I think you lost that. You lost that hour somehow.
Every time when we have to schedule a podcast, I'm in a different time zone now. I have to text you and be like, "Wait, so is 10:30 your time? What time is that going to be for me?" Because I'm not good at that math. But all right, we've got a lot to get to in this show. So let's jump into, we'll start with college basketball talk. And we're recording this on Wednesday, a little bit different this week. Cincinnati's the only local team that's played their game for the week. So we'll start there. And if you were holding out any hope about this UC team potentially keeping those at-large bid hopes alive, it's all gone now as they lost in overtime at Oklahoma on Tuesday night. A social media conversation I saw online after this, Skinny, was all about the close losses UC has suffered this season. And there were two main points I saw. One was just the frustration this season has caused with all the close losses. And two, that UC losing all these close games was a major indictment on Wes Miller and the coaching staff. What do you make of all Cincinnati's close losses? Is this a major issue with the coaching staff, or is this a team that was not ready to compete at the Big 12 that actually did a pretty good job of competing in a lot of games?
Yeah, I don't think it's a great roster. And I think they did a great job of competing. And I honestly thought they were going to throw the towel in after the TCU game because that felt like, okay, we've had all this go for us this year, and we just don't have the record we wanted to have and maybe could have had, and TCU kicks your teeth in. And then Houston looms, and after getting down early, they battled the whole night that night, and honestly had Oklahoma beat. Last night, as we're doing this on Wednesday morning. But I think that should be more of a feather in the cap of how hard he gets these guys to keep playing through. Lack of consistency among players to too many turnovers. I could also argue Wes's offense sucks. I mean, they don't do anything other than dribble, jack up shot. I mean, they had 8 assists on 28 made baskets last night. That's horrible. I think there's some things you can point to, but I think it's roster construction. Yeah, does that start with Wes Miller? It does. And he's going to have to get better. He's going to have to get better players.
I would tend to agree with you, though, that the issue I see from a coaching perspective or a Wes Miller perspective isn't as much about X and O's at end of games the way everyone is pointing to right now. And don't get me wrong, They have lost a lot of close games, and that does get concerning to a certain extent. But right now, being that this is the first year that they're playing against Big 12 competition, I would be more concerned about the roster that he's put together and what the roster looks like going forward and how they'll be able to do that in the Big 12. It's not like Wes hasn't recruited anybody, and it's not like UC hasn't had players, but it's a totally new game for them, recruiting against AAC teams versus recruiting against Big 12 teams. And I think it's really easy in a conference like the Big 12 right now to find yourself in the bottom without doing anything wrong. You don't have to have a terrible coach. You don't have to go into some spiral and lose all your players and have a complete rebuild or anything. I think it can happen just because you're not going to be able to compete NIL wise, talent perspective wise, all of that for the next several years. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but if I'm a UC fan right now, that is more of my concern than it is that Wes Miller's X's and O's aren't good enough in end of game situations.
I mean, in these mega conferences now, with so many good programs hopping into these Big 12s and Big 10s and SECs, again, I say this in football, somebody's going 3-9. You don't think it's going to be you. In basketball, somebody's going 6-12 in the league. You don't think it's you, but it is you. And I don't know if that's a finger-pointing indictment or not. I think it is just understanding, okay, we got players that can compete. We don't have enough that can win consistently in this league. And I either need to have grown-ass men like Houston does, or I need to have a couple of NBA caliber freshmen, which they don't have. They don't have an NBA player on the roster. And I think you've got to have something along those lines, or in Houston's case, literal grown-ass men to win big in that league.
Cincinnati this year in Big 12 play, 12 of their 17 Big 12 games have come down to the final possessions. Not necessarily a one-possession game, but it's down to the final minute, and it's a two-possession game maybe. UC is 4-8 in those 12 games. So obviously not the record you'd like to see in those situations. I get the hand-wringing about that. That is definitely concerning. But again, I think the bigger concern for me coming out of this season from a UC side of things is, how do you get the roster to where it needs to be to compete in the Big 12 going forward? And the problem with that is, Skinny, is it's not just, okay, we'll build off of what happened this year. Now with the transfer portal, it's like, hey, can you keep Jizzle James? Can you keep whoever else that is promising going forward? So it becomes an issue every year to try to keep the roster you have while also infusing it with more talent that you need. And I think both UC and Xavier are both in that position coming out of this year where it's like, okay, you have a promising piece or two, but you need to make sure you can keep those guys first, and then you need to add some significant pieces to go with them.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, it not just the 6-11 record inside the Big 12, but add the two non-conference games of any consequence. This team was 6-13 in games that mattered. I mean, their best win in the non-conference now as we've sorted all through this whole season from a net perspective is over Georgia Tech, which is 145 in the net. So again, in games of consequence, the Big 12 games and the two non-conference games, the Xavier game and the Day game, 6-13 says a lot, in my opinion.
They wrap up their regular season this weekend with a home game against West Virginia. You would imagine they can win that one. And then we will get into the Big 12 conference tournament. So we'll follow UC through that. The rest of the teams are still yet to play this week. Obviously, Xavier plays on Wednesday night as we're recording this. NKU will play on Thursday night in the Horizon League tournament. Kentucky plays tonight.
Yep, against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, so that's right, Vanderbilt. Since we're not going to talk about those other games, Skinny, and next week it will be the start of all the conference tournaments. Horizon League tournament is this week. All the other teams will be in conference tournament play starting next week. I want you to rank the order of the likelihood for the local teams to win their conference tournaments. Cincinnati, Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, and Xavier are the four teams that we talk about typically on this podcast. I'm
going to put UC at the bottom because they need, even if they beat West Virginia, and we both think they probably will because it's a home game, they need Kansas State to lose to Iowa State at home in order to stay out of that Tuesday 11-14, 12-13 game. So if they have to play in that game, you talk about an uphill climb to win that conference tournament. It's going to already be uphill as it is, but to add another layer onto it, man, that's just extremely tough. So I'm putting them at the bottom. I'm going to put Xavier next to them, and I'm going to put NKU second, and I'm going to put Kentucky first because I think Kentucky's the most capable of those teams. It's got a legit chance to get a double bye. I think it's got something to play for where Cal doesn't usually think the SEC tournament means something. If they can beat Tennessee, and that's a big if, on Saturday in the regular season finale, they're closing in on the 3 seed line if they have a nice run in the SEC tournament. So the SEC tournament is going to matter to them significantly. So I'm going to go UK 1, NKU 2. And I say that knowing NKU is kind of an extremely tough opening game at Wright State. But then Xavier and UC to me seem like absolute pipe dreams to win their conference tournaments.
I was talking to another coach that's not in the Horizon League, but he was texting me saying he thought the winner of Thursday night's game between NKU and Wright State would become the favorite to win the Horizon League tournament. I don't think it's necessarily as much about the talent of the teams left, but I think those two teams have been so good in the Horizon League tournament and have that confidence of just being there. They know what to do when they get to Indy for the Final Four, and all of that experience, I think, matters this time of year. So I don't necessarily disagree with that, but to your point, that's a really difficult first game to get past, considering they've already lost to Wright State twice this year during the regular season. I would agree with you on the first two. I would flip Cincinnati and Xavier just because I think maybe there's a path where like Houston loses in the Big 12 tournament, and then I feel like maybe Cincinnati can pull off an upset against almost anyone else in that conference if you get the right layout. I don't see any way that that Xavier is getting past Marquette, Creighton, UConn.
That's probably, that's a legit point, but I go the same way for UC. It's not just winning a big game in that conference tournament. It's surviving that opening. I mean, they would probably, as it sits here right now, wind up playing, if they play on Tuesday, again, they need Kansas State to lose to get out of that game and beat West Virginia. They would probably play West Virginia, or Oklahoma State on a neutral floor, and both those teams beat UC. Yeah, that's just for a chance to play the 5th seed, which at the moment's either Kansas or Texas Tech or BYU.
Yeah, I mean, who's the teams that UC struggled most with this year, had the worst trouble matching up with? It was Iowa State, it was TCU, and then obviously everyone struggles with Houston. Right. And there's a decent chance that their first 2 games, if chalk kind of plays out here in the final games of the season, that they could open up with TCU, with Iowa State waiting for them in the next round. So you're right. It could be a really impossible draw for them as well. But I mean, we're really splitting hairs there when we're talking about who has the better chance to win their conference tournament, UC or Xavier, when both of them have very little to no chance, in my opinion. One other question I had for you, Skinny, about the local college basketball side of things with men. Jason Williams at the Enquirer wrote a piece about John Brannon. I think it dropped today on Wednesday as we're recording this. It was about John wanting to get back into coaching, and Jason Williams essentially wrote that some mid-major team should give him that opportunity. He mentioned the possibility of John coaching in the Horizon League, the MAC, or the Sun Belt, and John mentioned that he felt that those level of schools would probably be a good fit for both sides. The specific teams mentioned by Jason Williams in the piece were IUPUI and Detroit Mercy, are both going to be needing new head coaches this year, presumably in the Horizon League. Also an interesting school that he threw out there that I hadn't really thought about, but would maybe make some sense. Marshall, which is where John Brannon played, obviously. Yeah. Dan D'Antoni, he's been there for a while. He's had some success there, including last year they had a pretty good record, but they lost their last 7 games this year. They have a losing record, and he is 76 years old.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could just be time for Dan D'Antoni to move on and pass the program on to someone with capable hands. And I would imagine he would think pretty highly of John Brannon taking over for him.
I mean, John was not found to have any NCAA violations. It was an ugly divorce with UC. I realized some of that, but I kicked this around, and I truly believe that was really kind of the start of the transfer portal era. It wasn't all that long ago, but that was kind of the start of it. And you had a president that freaked out that a bunch of guys were transferring, and then they tried to find a way to fire John for cause. I don't want to relitigate this whole thing, but people point the finger that John's the one that started to bring the program down. I would argue he didn't have a chance to go into the transfer portal himself to get guys to come in. I mean, he was done before that. So I don't think he got a fair shake in that regard. And so these years, 3 years later, to keep playing the finger, John Brannon brought the program. No, he didn't. He didn't. The president and the AD brought the program down, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I also like how UC fans always look at that situation one way and want to place the blame on John for it. But then they want to talk about UC's football hiring with Scott Satterfield and point to that and be like, hey, that was handled terribly. Why did that happen? And maybe there's a common thread between those two things, and it's the athletic director that did both of them. Maybe he has a weird way of handling things. And I think, again, if you and I were to sit here and say something on this podcast about this year, Xavier, Kentucky, or whoever is going to have 6 players jump in the transfer portal, neither one of us would flinch. We'd say, that's a lot, but it's kind of par for the course in today's era. that was what happened basically at UC. 6 players got in the transfer portal. Some of them they knew, they planned on them going in the transfer portal. Some of them were talented guys who were ready to test the new opportunities and freedom that players had in the transfer portal. We didn't know at that time, coming out of COVID and everything with the new transfer portal rules, that this was going to be the regular every year. And every year teams are going to have 4 or 5 guys, 6 guys even, getting in the transfer portal. So it felt a little bit more momentous at the time when the transfer portal thing happened. Now looking back, that feels like honestly a pretty big nothing burger.
Yeah, I mean, one of them, I always get my Madisons confused, but one of them was good, one of them wasn't. They both left, so you didn't really lose, but one wasn't good enough to really even play. So, I mean, a couple of those guys weren't really even good enough to play that left. But
right.
I think it was an administrator that didn't understand where we were at the start of the transfer portal. I get some of that, but then to point the finger of blame and try to find a way to fire a guy is just insane to me.
Yeah, I mean, it really never made sense the way that went down. Some of the reaction to it certainly didn't make sense. But I'll say now that things have calmed down, I think for the most part, it seems like people seem to understand that that got a little bit crazy in terms of the narrative of it. And I think John would be a really good coach somewhere to get. I mean, think about all these schools right now that are at the bottom of their conference.
Even as a mess as that team, they still got to the conference tournament championship game that year.
Right. Now that you see when things were going wrong. I mean, think about what he did while he was at NKU and how well he had that thing rolling, and it continued to go on after he left. So I think if you're a mid-major school right now in the bottom half of your conference, man, you could really turn things around pretty quickly by hiring a guy like John Brannen.
I agree.
All right, one last college basketball question. This is more of a national story, not even on the men's side of things. Iowa guard Caitlin Clark has been kind of the rage in college basketball this year across the country. She is now the NCAA Division I overall top scorer, men's or women's. She scored 35 on Sunday to pass Pistol Pete's 3,667 total career points. She broke the women's all-time record 2 weeks before that. So, Skinny, I'll ask you, do you care about Caitlin Clark passing Pistol Pete's record?
Well, the way it was celebrated, I don't think it's apples to apples. It's apples to oranges. The women's game versus the men's game. B, she's played, it feels like, for an eternity, and Pistol Pete played for 3 years because they didn't allow freshmen to play back then. There was no 3-point line. Now, I could also argue Pistol Pete had his dad coaching, and he let the kid do anything he wanted to do, shoot it 50 times a game if he wanted, all those things. But again, it's complete apples to oranges in my opinion. And listen, I do. Caitlin Clark for me as a basketball coach is must see television. I think she's outstanding in many ways, fun to watch. I love the way she plays the game. Her shooting form is just spot on. There's so much to like about her. But again, for people that try to make this comparison, I'm like, I don't understand why we need to compare it. Pistol Pete's the all-time leading men's scorer. She's the all-time leading women's scorer. They played in different eras, so let's just stop with the nonsense.
I do think it is cool to say you're the all-time leading scorer in Division I college basketball history, period. Like, I don't think it needs to be compared to be like, who was the better player or something like that. But I do think to be able to say no one, men or women, scored more than you, whether you're Pistol Pete or whether you're Caitlin Clark, I think that's a cool title to have. I get why people brought it up. I do think some of the arguments about it this week or the last 2 weeks have been incredibly stupid. I would actually tell you, I think Caitlin Clark's record is more legit. I mean, she's playing the actual game of basketball. Pistol Pete was shooting 40 times in a game for his dad. He was doing what Antoine Davis did at Detroit Mercy. He wasn't really playing basketball. He was doing a little exhibition to get his points every night. Caitlin Clark's playing in real games against real competition, playing a team game. She's clearly just that much better than everyone else. She's not having to shoot 40 times a game to get this done. So I think hers is like more real than Pistol Pete's record was. But to your point, I mean, it's apples to oranges. There's no point in being like one's better than the other or vice versa. Right. It's just a silly conversation to have. How much have you been paying attention to her chase of these records in general? Like, have you tuned in? Have you watched any of it? Have you been catching highlights? Has this conversation in general caught your fascination?
No, I started watching her last year, especially in the tournament. And that's how she kind of caught my eye. And it feels like she's on one of the networks every Sunday playing in a early afternoon window game where, it's that or watch Maryland Northwestern men. No, thank you. I'd rather watch Caitlin Clark, to be quite frank. So it's easy to tune in and watch. But yeah, no question about it. She is absolutely fun to watch. There's no question about that.
The one thing about her game that I feel like is kind of new or that we haven't seen a lot on the women's side is her ability to get the deep 3-point shot off with ease, like the
Yes.
quickness, the strength of it. Like even they were showing they put down a sticker at the mark where she broke the record on their home floor, and it's a very long 3-pointer, and they had a video of her teammates trying to, just during practice and shoot around, trying to make that same shot. I mean, a lot of the other girls are giving it their all to even get the ball there. They're like heaving it. They're not even coming close. And she shoots that shot with total ease on a step back. So I just think that's part of her game that's really fun to watch, because that's one of the biggest differences between the men's game and the women's game is how easily they can get those step back threes off, the strength to which they shoot. She kind of has that to her game.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, I still amaze watching Steph Curry get his shot off against bigger guys by creating just enough little space and then just such a quick release to get it off. And, you know, he shoots it the way I like. He shoots with the dip method. He dips that thing down and uses his legs, but it's so quick that you could be 6'6" and right in front of him. He's still going to shoot it in your face. And she does the same thing. I mean, she's getting defensive pressure like crazy because of who she is. But she gets that shot off, and you're right, to your point, she gets it off from really deep. And it's been a fun run to watch her. But again, it is an apples to oranges comparison between the two. Though, you know, I will say, and I heard somebody on a national broadcast this week, I think I'm more amazed at this, at LeBron getting to 40,000 points. And if you think about it, an NBA player would have to average 2,000 points for 20 years just to get to that level. How many guys are going to play 20 years anymore? How many guys are going to have the durability to play enough games and to score 2,000 points and all of those things? And he's still going to pile on top of that. I mean, I think I'm more amazed at that than I am at what Caitlin Clark has done.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that record will be broken?
I don't, especially when it was put in the context of which I can't remember when it was a national. I was driving around Sunday and I heard it, and I went, that's a hell of a context. 20 years averaging 2,000 points a season. I mean, what about a season where you get hurt early and you play 10 games? What about a season where you get older and you score 1,600 points? You need to have 2,400 point seasons to make up for that. And you got to do it for 20 years. And he's probably going to do it for maybe a couple more, right? To add on to that total. I think it's going to be almost impossible.
Yeah. The biggest thing with LeBron now is we are to that point where it's like, when does the body start breaking down and failing him? Because it really has. I mean, he's had his nicks and bruises. He had to sit out late in years, whatever, when they've been out of it at times or when they haven't been playing as well. But I mean, honestly, for the most part, he has held up incredibly well in terms of his durability, but he's also a huge guy who has played so many years and played so many minutes that at some point you feel like he is just not going to be able to continue to stay healthy. And then how does the end of his career look at that point? Because right now it feels like it's the only thing that's going to slow him down. He's still playing at such a high level. He is still clearly one of the top 5 to 10 players in the game at worst.
Yeah, no question. That's my point. It's his timeline at the moment. And, is it 2 more years? Is it 4 more years? Is it when Bronny comes out of the G League when he's 26 to play a game with him? I mean, what's that look like?
It feels like that's what we're getting at here, right? There's going to be one last big drama-filled offseason where he goes to some team that agreed to draft Bronny or what have you. Like, we've got one big, the decision type storyline left in LeBron's career, and then he'll sail off into the sunset as Bronny gets cut the next year after
the next day, whatever the next day is.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the Bengals, Skinny. Joe Burrow provided an update on his recovery Sunday. We were talking about this last week, and we were mentioning the videos that were popping up from NBA games where he's sitting courtside and not shaking hands with his throwing arm because people were thinking that meant something, right? Well, now he says after Sunday that he expects to be cleared for full contact in the middle of May. I know when you guys talked to Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor last week, they were intentionally trying not to put any timelines on this. And then a few days later, Joe Burrow goes out and says, yeah, actually, it's going to be middle of May is when I should be good to go. He said he anticipates returning to full throwing sessions during the Bengals' organized team activities, noting that this timeline is similar to his past few off seasons and that he usually doesn't start throwing until the OTAs come about. So he also mentioned, Skinny, that he's cleared to return to lifting weights normally. So like this part of the off season will be normal for him and he'll be able to lead up going into the OTAs as he typically would. So I guess all of that is to say is Joe Burrow going to get a normal off season here for the most part?
Well, we had that narrative last season, right? And then all of a sudden, the second day of training camp, it all flipped on its ear. And I'm going to guess the second we ask him about having a normal offseason, he's going to shut that down. I honestly believe that. And I guess I can't blame him. I mean, he even last year said knock on wood a couple of times when he answered the question. And lo and behold, he gets hurt again. I do hope this is the case. If he does feel anything with the wrist or with his body, that he is wise enough this time around to say, I'm shutting it down for a couple of days. I'm shutting it down for a week. I'm going to trust I'm going to trust Jake to go win this week. I hope that's the case because, again, his long-term health is really tied to how far the Bengals can go with this thing. And that's even saying I think Jake Browning is more than a capable backup. I think Jake Browning is one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL, but he's not Joe Burrow.
Yeah. I'll say Joe Burrow's ACL wasn't related to his appendix, which wasn't related to his calf muscle, which wasn't related to his wrist. Like none of these things compound and make me think he's fragile or there's some long-term issue here. But if he does not get through this offseason unscathed here, at some point we are going to have to agree that there is something going on. I mean, maybe it's just terrible luck, but it does have to become a real concern if something does happen again this offseason.
Well, again, I mean, the day he ends up hurting his calf, he had the sleeve on it, right? So the guess all along has been that there was something bothering him, but he tried to push through it practice-wise. There's still the belief that he had a wrist injury before he suffered the wrist injury in the Baltimore game, that he was playing with a wrist injury.
It was just an iPad sleeve, Skinny. It was just an iPad sleeve. Just sketching.
That Jadeveon Clowney landed on him and I mean, all of those things. So, maybe the lesson for him is if something hurts, shut it down, dude.
Yeah. Also, Skinny, on the Bengals side of things, we are almost to the start of the NFL free agency period. Teams can begin negotiations with free agents next Monday, March 11th at 12 p.m. And then players can officially be signed by new teams on Wednesday, March 13th at 4 p.m. with the start of the new league year. A lot of names will be getting tossed around that the Bengals should go after. Every time it said, oh, this guy might be available, it's like the Bengals fans on social media pounce. Like, that's got to go get him. Are there any you've heard or seen that you like?
Well, I'm doing a piece each day this week, 5 positions of where I think they'll attack free agency. I'm kind of combining the fifth day. So I did right tackle on Monday. I did on Tuesday, I did the safety positions. We're doing this podcast. I'm going to do defensive tackles after this, tight ends on Thursday, and then kind of running back, slot receiver on Friday, because technically they still have a running back in Joe Mixon at the moment. And it's not clear cut that they go in free agency to get a slot receiver. So I'm going to kind of combine those things. I think if I'm prioritizing, right tackle, it's got to be a priority, but I also don't think they're going to break the bank, because if they're going to break the bank, they probably just re-sign Jonah Williams. I think that would be the route that they would go. The name that, again, I think they're going to wind up getting the 1-year stopgap and probably drafting one in at least the first 2 days, hoping one of those top 5 tackles in the draft slide to them at 18. And that way you hope that guy actually goes to camp and beats out your signee. I mean, one name I put out there, I did a list of Pro Football Focus rankings of these tackle positions and the safeties and all that. And some of them I even listed, say, hey, these guys are too rich for their blood. I kind of landed on Jermaine Illuminor as one of the tackles, played for the Raiders and actually was a guard at one point, but slid out to right tackle, played pretty well last year. I don't think he's a long-term solution, but again, a backup plan. You can't go into this year saying we're drafting our right tackle and plugging and playing him. That just cannot be the plan. And at safety, Geno Stone seems to fit right in the ballpark price-wise. Spot Rack's got him at a decent value of 3 years, 21 mil, about $7 million per year. He's coming off a really good season. He led the NFL safeties and interceptions with 7. He had a big one on Joe Burrow. He graded out pretty good by Pro Football Focus. He was 7th out of all the safeties in grade. And I think he comes at a pretty good price. He's only 25 years old. So those are a couple for now. And when I dive into tackles and tight ends, we can maybe talk about that a little bit. Well, we'll probably be into free agency next week. But I do think the priorities would be right tackle, safety, defensive tackle, and then anything else on top of that's gravy. Slot receiver, extra defensive tackle, corner. I do think they probably got to go get a veteran corner. There are so many safeties, though, Rick. I mean, I listed the top 15, and there's probably another 10 that are starting caliber players that could be an upgrade. So, I just the combine conversations, it just feels very much like they're ready to move Dax Hill back to cornerback and probably use him as a safety only in emergencies. I just don't think they can go into this year going, all right, we're hoping Dax improves, and we need him to improve. And if he doesn't, not have a fallback plan, especially with so many damn safeties on the market that are affordable.
You just mentioned a website where you can go and look up a lot of different details about contracts. You said Spot Rack.
Yes.
And I want to know, I've always wondered this. How do you know it's Spot Rack? Is that true? I've always said Pro Track. But I always wondered that.
I call it Spot Rack. I don't know. It looks like Spot Rack to me.
Okay. Well, Okay, if anyone knows why, like what is the meaning behind the name? Is that like somebody's name? Was it someone like Eric Spol? I have figured it was someone like Eric Spoelstra started it, and so it's Spotrack.
Spotrack. Maybe it is Spotrack. Maybe I should call it Spotrack.
I don't know. Some of the other bigger names that I've heard getting tossed around that Bengals fans are interested in. I imagine most all these names are probably flashy names that are going to get a lot of money that the Bengals probably won't even have much interest in.
Christian Wilkins.
Right. But these are the names that fans hear about, and it's the names that are getting circulated on social media. So I just want to throw a couple of them out there, see what you think. Saquon Barkley.
I think the market value for him is going to be too rich for their blood.
How about a guy that isn't going to be too rich and has a history here in CJ Uzomah?
Yeah, I don't know if there's value. I don't know do you bring him in with the thinking that if he's got something, I don't know if he's got anything left in the tank.
Yeah, I think there is just everyone loved him. He was a nice guy and a likable guy. So the fan base is all going to rally around and say, wouldn't he be a good veteran leadership guy in the locker room? And I don't know that's what the Bengals are missing right now. Quite honestly, I think they need a guy who can help Joe Burrow catch passes and make plays. Yeah,
Hayden Hurst's name's gotten thrown back around too. And, Hayden was really good the year he was here, but it feels like the years around that year he's hurt or whatever. Neither one of those just seem like they seem like Hayden Hurst was the right fit at the right time and panned out. CJ Uzomah had a nice last year here, but I just don't know what's left in the tank there. And again, is your plan to make him your number one tight end, or are you going to bring in others? I truly think they sign at least two of their own three. I think Drew Sample, unless there's a market for him out there, is re-signed, and I think so too is Tanner Hudson, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm not so sure Tanner Hudson isn't more talented than all the guys we just talked about.
Yeah, his only issue is he just doesn't have enough experience as an inline blocker. He admits it.
But Sample is that guy, right?
Yeah.
Sample is your every down guy. And
the problem is Sample's not as dynamic a receiver. Tanner's not a good enough blocker. And so it feels like when Sample's in the game, he's in the game to block, so you know what's coming. And when Tanner's in the game, he's in to receive, so you know what's – so I think they did a good job of pulling that off, especially using Drew as that blocking running back a lot of times, letting him up in the backfield. And actually became a nice little check down receiver as well, in my opinion. Had some nice runs after the catch, which stunned me a little bit too. But everybody's just so high – in an offense that has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and whatever you're going to put in the slot, the tight end just isn't a huge factor. And all their tight ends last year, by the way, combined for 88 receptions. It wasn't awful.
Yeah, I'm not totally against what they have right now and just kind of going forward with that. They probably need another body of some sort, but sure. I don't know that they have to get some huge upgrade at the tight end position. It'd be nice, of course, but there are much more glaring needs. You mentioned Christian Wilkins. He's just going to be way too much money, right?
Way too much money, yes.
Yeah, defensive tackle. L'Jarius Sneed.
Well, he got franchise tagged.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. George Fant is another name. I've seen there's some regional ties there.
Yeah, he played at Western.
Yep. Right tackle.
Yeah, I was more in the Luminor mix, but Fant was, I think, right below him and probably in the affordability range. And again, Mekhi Becton as well. But Mekhi Becton's got an injury history, although he did play a lot of games this past year. I don't know if that's the risk you're willing to take of, okay, if he's healthy, we think we got ourselves a good player. We're only looking for this as a stopgap for a year or two. Maybe that's the route to go. I wouldn't be – George Fant wouldn't bother me. Again, whatever you're doing in that stopgap guy, it's with drafting – the long-term solution in mind as well.
And he seems like that type of guy. He's probably more of like a backup guy ideally, but you could he started a lot last year. So you could get away with him starting, I think.
Yeah. Oh, agree. He's got proven NFL tape, and I've said it before, especially at the tackle position. Give me proven NFL tape over hope to draft pick guy, because that has not worked for them whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, those were a handful of just names I had seen over the last day or two that were being talked about by Bengals fans. I'm sure there are several others that fans are interested in, but we'll look for your updates on local12.com and see if there are any other names that you throw out there. Let's move on to the Reds, Skinny, where I think, in my opinion, there is one big story over the last week, and that is Nick Lodolo. He faced a few batters in a live batting practice session and said he felt good. And this was on Thursday or Friday of last week. And then the next day, David Bell, while speaking to the media, said that Lodolo's recovery was, quote, not perfect, and that he was, quote, still feeling it, meaning the injury. He also noted that he was going to be reevaluated and have his leg rescanned. Then Bell said it was, quote, no major concern. Skinny, are you agreeing with David Bell that this stress fracture reaction, whatever it is, that Nick Lodolo is still feeling nearly a year later after he had surgery is no major concern?
I think it's a major, major concern.
Huge concern.
Goodness gracious. I mean, it doesn't feel like he's able to come back from it at the moment. And until he does come back, he hasn't come back. So again, I know he was making progress. It was good to see him have that session, at least try to throw to some batters live. But again, when you come out of something like that, where not exactly a high stress situation, I know he was doing everything was being done at game speed, obviously. But again, it wasn't a 5-inning stint, and it wasn't again in a high leverage situation. And you felt a reaction after that. To me, this is a huge, huge deal. Yeah,
I mean, they didn't say he was hurting or there was something wrong with it, but he said he felt it. And I mean, when you're talking about a stress fracture, and not that they're all the same, not that these are related at all, but look at Zach Freemantle for Xavier, for instance. He's now had 3 surgeries on a stress fracture injury in his foot, and it just keeps coming back.
This is before your time, but Sam Bowie had that issue at Kentucky, and he still played a long time in the NBA, but he was nowhere near the player he was before he had these reactions. He was gone for almost 2, I think actually was 2 full years of time that he missed because of stress fractures.
Yeah, and hundreds of other names that you could probably come up with in between those two of athletes that have suffered from recurring stress fracture injuries. I guess my thought right now with the Nick Lodolo, this news, but also what we've seen over the last year with him, it feels like he's gone from, I think he's the real ace of this staff.
Oh, I did too.
To I'll almost be surprised if his career works out now.
I know.
And that is sad to say.
I'm kind of with you on that because I'm with you on both counts. He looked more major league ready than Hunter Green did, and I don't say that in an ugly way. He just did. And the outings when he was healthy, he was really, really good. And then you're right. This is going on almost. We're not close to a full year yet, but we're getting damn close to it. And this feels like a huge setback to me.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we're even talking about this. I thought for sure we would go into spring training, Lodolo would be good to go, and hopefully, by the opening day or at least a month into the season, we'd be talking again about, hey, Nick Lodolo is looking good. He might be the real dude like we thought he was. And now I just find myself in this place with him where it's like, okay, just wake me up when he's healthy and actually contributing again, because I don't believe it's really going to happen. And that's crazy because, again, it was the beginning of last year when I was convinced that, like, he is going to be the guy for this staff. He's going to be really good and be a long-term solution at the top of your rotation, whether he's the number 1 or the number 2. He is going to be great. And the only reason he would be the number 2 is because Hunter Green ended up being so dominant and so great and living up to his potential that he surpassed him. And now we're sitting here and it's like, they don't have an ace. Who knows what's going to happen with the top of the rotation. And even like to start the year, it feels like Nick Lodolo might not even be available. They're not saying that yet, but it feels like that could be a possibility.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're coming up tomorrow and 3 weeks away from opening day, and he's got to get some. He's got to only show he can be healthy and pitch healthy, but then get some work in as well. And he hasn't been able to do that.
If he's not available, can I give you the name I like for that rotation spot? I like Nick Martinez, at least the sounds of him. I haven't watched a ton of him, but the things I've heard about him, I like. He's aggressive, throws a lot of pitches. I know he's got versatility. They like him as that kind of long reliever, maybe that flex role.
Yeah, I like him in that role too.
I get that, but if you have to go with Lodolo's not going to be available and you need the 5th starter, I kind of like the idea of him having that.
I think it'd be Brandon Williamson. I do.
Probably. It probably will end up being him, but I kind of like the idea of this Nick. I mean, we need to see more of him. I'd be lying to you if I said I'd followed his career before he got here, but I like the sound of it.
Back to the injury situation, I start to worry about Matt McClain.
Yeah, although it does seem like he's getting back into the mix.
It seemed like it till he hurt the oblique again.
I said that last week, though. Those oblique injuries are kind of the same way. Now, not as serious, I feel like, as the stress fracture, but it's kind of the same thing where you just feel like when guys get those oblique injuries, it can recur sometimes. And so we're dealing with that with him. I'm way more optimistic about Matt McClain than I am Nick Lodolo.
I will say they did put, other than Matt McClain, kind of close to their opening day lineup on the field Monday. Now, Andrew Abbott got batted around a little bit, but they put up 15 runs. I know it was against the Oakland AAAs, but still, that line, when Christian Encarnacion-Strand's batting 8th and doing those things, that's a pretty friggin' good lineup.
You got to admit, especially with this young group, like when they do something like that where they put them all out in the lineup together and you've got Christian Encarnacion-Strand batting 7th or whatever it was. And
I think he's batting 8th.
Batting 8th. I mean, it is kind of fun to think about how good this team can be and how deep they can be, even though it's spring training and even though they're playing against AAA.
Noel Marte hit 9th, and I know he's just coming back from the hamstring, but Noel Marte looks like a clear-cut 300 hitter plus to me.
Right. Well, and CES is a cleanup hitter for pretty much any team in the in Major League Baseball. So they really do have, and I know this is just spring training lineups, whatever, but when you see that depth 1 to 9 in a lineup like that with a DH, it is pretty startling. It's a far cry from where the Reds were at a year or two ago.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, that tells you the depth. That was a really good lineup that was put on the field that didn't have arguably your most complete offensive player, Matt McClain, in it.
Right. No, I mean, that really says something. Skinny, anything else on the current Reds team? I do have something I want to get, one other baseball story to get to.
Fire away.
All right. This is an interview from Dan Patrick's show with Joey Votto.
6-time All-Star, won an MVP, 17 years in Major League Baseball, all with the Reds. And here he sits all alone with us. Good morning, Joey.
Good morning. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah. How's morale?
Well, it's low. It's as low as it gets.
Okay.
And at this rate, I don't see it getting any better. But I'm on the show, and I'm here to hawk my wares. I'm hopeful that a Dan Patrick push will get me a job. So here I am.
Oh, so you might be an analyst. Your days playing are over?
Oh, no. No. I'm here to let's get me a baseball job. Oh. Let's play some baseball.
Okay.
No, not an analyst job. No.
Okay. So
funny enough, I've had 10 times the analyst jobs over this offseason than I have had any baseball offers.
What's the best offer you've received so far from a team?
No, just chatter, just talk. No firm offer yet. No.
Do you think the beard is helping or hurting you with teams that might be interested in you?
It's I don't know if it's making a difference. I can tell you it's a reflection of my emotional state. I feel.
All right, so that's probably enough. They go on for another 10 minutes or whatever, but it kind of gives you the vibe of where that interview was headed. And so, Skinny, after seeing that, I'm sure you probably watched more of it than that. Do you feel bad for Joey Votto right now? Where are you at on this Joey Votto story?
Well, I do, but I mean, I think you have to sometimes confront the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is you're a 40-year-old who's not hitting anymore, coming off, shoulder injuries, and your best spot is probably DH, and there's just there's no room at the end, and I'm sorry for that, but I mean, you don't get to make the rules in that regard, dude. If you want to still play, I mean this sincerely, you're going to think I'm a kook, and I am a kook, but if you want to still play, you got more money than God, go play for the Florence Yalls. I mean, honestly, if you still want to play, go play for an independent league team. And honestly, maybe show people you can still do it, because even for minimum money, I don't think teams think you can do it, or they have something better on their roster. And I'm sorry for that, but that's just the reality of the situation.
Well, there was a mention that right there you heard where he has gotten offers to be an analyst.
Yes.
And I'd also heard him say that he has gotten offers to coach, come be an instructor for teams. I think the Reds have even offered him that opportunity. And that just feels brutal for a guy who still believes he can play, and time has passed him by, and he's now everyone's giving him the out, going, come on, man. It's time. Just come back, be an instructor for us, help out the young guys. We'd love to have you, love to have your presence around. And he's just not buying into that. He still thinks. And the funny thing is, in that interview, Skinny, he actually went on to say, Dan Patrick asked him like point blank if I can't remember what team it was, maybe the Diamondbacks or something, offered you a minimum salary to come play. Votto basically said, I'd let my agent figure that out, but he basically said he would turn that down because he said, taking minimum job offers, the problem with that is it doesn't guarantee you at bats. They haven't invested in you. You don't have any power with that. So he's also saying he's kind of holding out for more than just a minimum offer. And it's like, well, I mean, Joey, you're not going to get that, I don't think.
At some point, it's just time. I mean, sadly, it's just time, man.
Yeah. Would you like to see him come back at this point? Or is it I'm getting to the point now where I'm almost dude, just hang it up. Just please go away and get to the point where we can start being nostalgic about you and feeling good about your career, and don't elongate this anymore and make it any more sad that he really tailed off at the end of his career and wasn't the same guy anymore.
And the numbers don't lie. And again, I know the mitigating circumstance of shoulder surgery had something to do with that, but Father Time had something to do with that as well, compounded by the shoulder issue. My man, he's a smart, go look at the numbers. They tell the story of a 40-year-old guy who can't do it anymore. I'm sorry for that, and it sucks that it ended that way. In a perfect world, let the Reds sign him to a one-day contract, come back, pinch hit for a game, get another. You kind of did that last year. Last year was kind of the farewell tour as it was.
And they screwed that up. Because he didn't want it to be the farewell tour.
That's on him.
That is. And the Reds maybe should have forced it upon him more. And been like, hey, man, we're really not bringing you back next year. So if you want the send-off, it's now or never. And maybe he still would have turned that down. But it does suck, to your point, that there was never that kind of final. It was like a half-hearted thing at the end of the year where no one really knew if that was it or not.
I saw some people calling the Reds cheap for not bringing him back. No, they're not cheap. They made a prudent baseball decision. And guess what's been proven by that? The other 31 teams in baseball say thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah.
Trust me, if they thought he could help them win games, a team, he would be signed by somebody by now, or at least would have been brought to spring training. That's how much people think he's washed up.
Yeah. Now, he did bring up that he felt the free agent market is completely at a halt right now. And multiple guys who are very talented that will be on teams have not been signed still. So he said, maybe it's partly that, but I'll be honest with you. I just don't think that's the case at all. To what you said, he would be at someone's spring training right now, getting at bats and getting a look to see if there's anything left in there. If anyone really had any faith in that.
Correct. Like I said, if he still wants to go, honestly, go play for the Florence Yalls. You don't need the money. You don't. Go hit independent league pitching.
Yeah. All right, Skinny, on to some Ask Skinny Anything, a very quick version this week. First was Skinny's thoughts on the new MLB jersey quality.
I can't believe how bad those things are. Those things are horrifyingly bad. Again, you're beholden. Why does everybody try to reinvent the wheel with uniforms? If they've looked good for the last few years and the players have liked them and they're durable and they feel right, why? Why do we constantly need? Yeah, I know that. And the problem is they look cheap.
I think that's the thing. I think they're using the cheapest materials they've ever used. They're probably making these things at like a fraction of the cost, and they're charging more than they've ever charged to have them done. So the Fanatics guy who does his little white party with all the celebrities every year, that guy's just raking in the dough.
Yeah, they're bad.
Was it Rubin? Was it Michael Rubin? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's one question. The next one is, does Skinny have a green thumb or kill all of his houseplants like me? You really strike me as a botanist over there, Skinny.
No, I'm still trying to find the perfect weed killer because I have lava rocks and I like the lava rocks, except pulling weeds through the lava rocks and then they get moss on them. It's the bane of my existence every spring and summer, trying to keep that somewhat cleaned out and weeded. Winter just killed off all the weeds. I went out the other day to get my garbage cans yesterday or Monday, and I looked, I'm like, here come a couple of weeds. So I would say this, if anybody, I got to call, my friend Jay Morrison gave me a weed killer that I can't think of what it was, and a pre-emergent. He said it's gold. So I'm gonna have to get back with him. But if anybody has a great weed killer pre-emergent, I use what the heck's the stuff in the yellow tub? Preen. Preen doesn't work. Preen doesn't work very well.
Preen's a lie. That is just a marketing tactic.
I think it is too, because we've got a flower bed out back that we weed every year. It's that one has mulch in it, and every year I put preen in there, and I look about a month later, and there's weeds all over the place. I got to pull out.
Yeah, preen's a marketing tactic. It's not real. I would also say, when I saw this question that someone sent in, I was thinking that you might bring up weed in your answer, but I did not expect it to go the way you did. So congrats to you. I didn't know how much plant experience you had. All right, this is a story we got sent that they wanted your opinion on. This is actually from Local 12. A high school in Kentucky was evacuated after fart spray was unleashed inside the facility Tuesday. The Oldham County Police Department wrote in a press release that a school resource officer at Oldham County High School in Buckner, Kentucky, reported that shortly after 11 a.m., school officials began receiving reports of a, quote, strong gas odor inside the facility. Police say the scent prompted officials to evacuate students and faculty members from the building. Authorities worked alongside school officials and were able to identify a 17-year-old girl who allegedly poured the liquid inside 2 trash cans, which caused the evacuation response from emergency services. Skinny, were you involved in any pranks during your school days?
Yeah, one that was not me, but one that I was involved in. There was a school sign on as you walked into Dixie Heights High School that had the word Dixie on it, and we all cut that sign off and actually took. There's like 5 or 6 of us. We each took a piece home with us.
Which part did you cut off?
The whole DIXIE. I think I got one of the I's. I think I got one of the I's.
I thought you were saying you shortened it to make it.
But
like
in middle school, there's a legendary story when I went to Akron Middle School of one of the students feeding a duck X-Lax and putting it in a teacher's car they did not like.
No way. That's a big time prank right there. They did that in middle school?
Yeah. Yeah.
Out them. Who was it?
I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, that was the legend that somebody did that.
So you don't know if it ever actually happened, or you just don't know who it was?
Yeah, both. I think it did happen. I mean, the way that was told, there was a lot of details to it of how messy the car got, and the teacher apparently
okay, 2 more follow-up questions. Did you know who the teacher was?
I do. I can't think of her. It was a female teacher. I can't think of what.
Okay, but there was like a specific teacher that it was rumored to have happened to. Yes. And did this happen while you were there, or was it before you and it was like rumored?
No, it was my 8th grade year.
Okay.
We moved after that year. We moved from Boone County out to Crestview Hills.
Well, like, was there any rumors about a kid who like randomly disappeared? No one knew why, or that they got detention or something, or was that?
They just somebody pulled it off. That's a good one.
That's a really good one if that's true.
Yeah, that's a mean one.
X-Lax to a duck.
Yeah.
Also catching the duck. Where'd they go? Thomas More, the little pond there?
Great question. Actually, this was at Ackerman, so I maybe they brought it from some. Well, there were some ponds around that way.
The best place to catch a duck in northern Kentucky is the Thomas More Pond.
No question. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I haven't done a lot of research on that topic, but I'm pretty sure that's the spot I would go if I had to do it. So the fart liquid, I just don't really understand the part where people had to be treated for it. What's that?
I don't know. I mean,
were they vomiting? Were they nauseous?
Maybe. I mean, maybe the smell was that bad.
Yeah, I don't.
We've told this. Oh, did you see the one about the guy on the plane that had like crazy, like awful gas that they actually had to make an emergency landing?
No, I mean, well, we had one of those a couple years ago we talked about, and then we had one earlier this year where it was the diarrhea plane. Yeah, there's been another fart plane, I guess you're telling me.
Fart plane.
I did not see the newest fart plane.
There is nothing worse in the world than when you're on that plane and all of a sudden you just catch a waft. It's like, what are we doing, man?
We have said it multiple times on this podcast. That is a form of terrorism.
I agree.
It just is.
And maybe so is this.
I mean, I don't think this is that like, I guess I'd have to smell the smell must have been incredible because it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. There's a lot of smells that come up in high schools. I mean,
no, there's no question about that. But if it was
cafeteria smells, all types of things that emanate through the building at different times.
No question. But if it was concentrated, whatever, and maybe that does give off just the worst odor known to mankind. Ugh.
Yep. All right. We'll wrap it up with this. Our former colleague and buddy, Jed DeMusi, I don't know if you saw this, has a new podcast.
Oh, I did not know that.
So Tough Sledding is the name of it. He's doing it with another former media guy, in town sports guy, Matt Edwards, who was at the NBC affiliate when
he actually interned at Local 12 as well.
Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah. So that would have been before my time. But both of those guys are doing a sports podcast now. They just debuted it. It's Tough Sledding. You should probably go listen to it, although I'll give you a little preview here, Skinny. I want to know, this is right where our guy Jed DeMusi comes in for the first time. This is their debut episode, the pilot, it said. Pilot episode. This is the first thing we hear from Jed DeMusi. I just want your opinion on how this sounds.
That better? I kind of put us down before. We did well.
Listeners.
We both made it to big markets and covered big stuff.
And I think we've both voluntarily left, which is sort of rare for at least people of our age in television news. But it is funny that I at the very least said, I want to get out of television sports so I can have the freedom to kind of do with, to have a little more freedom in my day, to be a little more connected to my family. Is he laying down doing
this podcast?
Could Matt wake him up? Did he not wake him up in time? Was it the Anthony Edwardson? What's going on?
I love me some Jed, as do you. Jed's got a great sense of humor. Jed knows his stuff. Pick up the pace, my man.
I heard that and I was absolutely stunned. I love Jed. I think he's one of the funnier people that I know. Legitimately witty, funny, smart. Also great on air. really good on-air presence, like great on camera. And then I listened to a pilot episode where I'm expecting these guys to be fired up. And mind you, I do not need broadcaster voice. I don't like broadcaster voice. I try to avoid it as much as possible. I think we don't do a ton of it on here.
As you know, I don't do broadcaster voice.
We try to, I think, just
I could try to do broadcaster voice if you would like me to try.
And look, there's got to be like a certain amount of energy when you're doing a show, right? Like you can't just come on and have no energy. Otherwise, it sounds like, quite frankly, what Jed did there. So I'm not saying he has to do broadcaster voice, but I mean, wake up. Maybe, first of all, how is his microphone this bad? They're starting a podcast. The man worked in media. He works in social media now as a marketer, and he like is recording off of the original iPod earbuds. What is going on, Jed?
Thanks for having me. You're making me do this podcast today. Okay, I'll do it. I guess I'll do it.
Skinny, his audio is worse than your audio, and you have no mic. You have nothing there. Like
That's correct. I just talk straight into the laptop.
Yeah, and his. I mean, Jed has. I asked this if they could get him a new tin can and string to record into. I'm not sure if that was the right USB or not.
What did he say?
Oh, well, Matt like claimed that, oh, sorry, I guess I'll drive down to Charleston and get Jed a new mic. And I was like, I'm sorry for thinking a man who worked in media would be able to get his audio clear in 2024. That was on me, I guess. But anyway, go check out Tough Sledding. I think it's a great podcast.
I'm sure it's going to be good, though. I'm sure it's going to be good.
Yeah, I actually did enjoy it. I listened to 3 episodes, so it was good. Go listen to that, but we had to give our guy Jed a hard time. So
of course,
maybe he will wake up for the next podcast. That would
I was going to say, I mean, just, 11:15. I got to do this podcast. All right, I'll do it. What do you want?
We're
what
back.
questions you going to ask me? Come on.
We got out, but now we're talking sports again. We're back.
He'll pick. I think this is the nudge he needs for us to nudge him to pick up the pace a little.
Well,
right?
if not, our Ask Any Anything segment is going to be great because we're going to have content every week to just make fun of Jed if he doesn't pick up the pace a little bit. We'll do it every week. I promise you we will.
There we go.
Right.
All right, when we're back next week, we'll be really into conference tournament action. Free agency will have hit, and probably we'll have some signings and some goings to talk about as well. And the Reds inch closer to the start of the regular season. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly Potpourri edition presented by Blake, the Attorney Mason.
You can always find our local 12 stories right here on YouTube. Don't forget to tap subscribe, and then you can get all the notifications.